You're listening to the news at 1 on BBC Radio Foyle. A victim of the contaminated blood scandal has described the consequences as a national disaster. Nigel Hamilton, who's a former DUP councillor, told a public inquiry in Belfast that it has left a legacy of trauma and pain for all those who were infected and their families. The inquiry is looking at why thousands of people with haemophilia were infected with hepatitis C or HIV in the 1970s and 80s. An estimated 4,000 people across the UK were infected and thousands are thought to have died. Well, our reporter Kevin Sharkey is at the inquiry. Kevin, what has the impact been on Nigel Hamilton's life?
Well, as you say, Nigel Hamilton is a former DUP councillor and a former mayor of Newton Abbey. But today he came to this inquiry as Nigel Hamilton, private citizen. And he outlined a catalogue of events in his life related to infected blood. He was infected with hepatitis C after an eye operation as a child in 1976. But it wasn't until 1990, that's a decade and a half or so later, that he was told that he'd been infected. Then in 2007, a CAT scan test discovered that he had cirrhosis of the liver. In 2017, he was told he had liver cancer, and in 2018, he had a liver transplant. And today, giving evidence at this inquiry, he outlined a lifetime of health difficulties and setbacks and tribulations impacting on his personal life, where he had 2 marriage breakups, on his professional and political careers, all curtailed to varying degrees.
And he believes victims here are being shortchanged.
Yes, and he spoke about how in 1998, when he was undergoing treatment, that he was going through what he described as a process of hell. And when he came to the end of his evidence, he was asked if he had anything else he'd like to say, and he told the chairman that he had. And he was quite scathing about the British government in terms of how it's handling and treating victims of the blood contamination scandal here in Northern Ireland. He said it was unacceptable to blame the lack of institutions at Stormont, and he also said that there is a hierarchy of victims, and he said that's why people like him and others have come to this inquiry.
They've done this in open forum, as have I, to provide an insight into what this national disaster has done to the lives of its victims and the affected and infected community, and the legacy of trauma and pain it has left all of us to cope with. So for me, its legacy can best be summed up by, firstly, in my case, and I know in the case of many, a legacy of institutional medical dependency, the paths of lives like mine irreversibly altered and influenced by infections introduced and outside our control and influence, and in so many cases, the apparent unwillingness to share information until years after the damage had begun to its assault on its victims. I call it the mantra of the mushroom. Kept in the dark and only fed with information when absolutely necessary. And secondly, and just as damning, the legacy and hierarchy of victimhood, and shamefully a government willing to allow financial support of those very victims, people like me, sons, daughters, fathers, mothers, brothers, and sisters, equally infected across the regions, equally affected across the regions, but unequally supported. If I lived in England, the recognition of my victimhood would be different. But in Northern Ireland, like those in Scotland and Wales, all victims of this same National Health Service disaster appear not worthy of equal financial support during the lifetime of this inquiry. That's a sad reflection on a government which has now created a hierarchy of victims under the pretense of it being a devolved matter. That, to me, as an act, is reprehensible.
And the inquiry, Kevin, also heard about a mother and a son who've been infected.
Yes, and this witness spoke this morning, and he gave his witness evidence anonymously, as is his right. And he spoke about how his mother was infected with hepatitis C after a tonsils operation, and then when he was around 2 or 3 years of age, his parents were told that he also had hepatitis C. His life since then has been one of ongoing tests, and that's impacted on his social life and on his working life. And he also explained that how, for example, most of his records and a lot of the letters relating to his health and well-being refer to him being as a public health risk, and he says that's difficult to have to deal with on an ongoing basis. He also said how recently, again, the impact of this scandal has impacted directly on his life when he lost a benefit during the new introduction of the personal independent payment scheme. And then he also told the inquiry how he can't get life insurance. He said, no one will touch me. There he was giving a sense of the difficulties and the ongoing hurt and anxiety that so many people who've been infected by this scandal are continuing to face in their day and daily lives.
Kevin Sharkey, thanks very much.